Wired for Winning, celebrating the extraordinary minds of those with ADHD. Everybody, and welcome to Wired for Winning. Today we have a lovely lady actually from North Yorkshire in the UK. That's the north part of the United Kingdom for anybody else watching in the United States or anywhere else in the world. Marie Helen, very welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us. And Marie was diagnosed at the age of 48. So she beat me or beat me by 5 years actually with my own diagnosis. And it's a particularly interesting story because is very active on social media, has a lot of followers and produces some very interesting content as well. Also, and what I'm particularly excited about to talk to you about, not only your own story today, but actually the type of coaching that you do with ADHD. So without further ado, I'm just going to click my clapperboard and we'll take it from there if that's okay. So you're very welcome. Click.
Thank you. Thank you. So in terms of my story, actually, I suppose you could say 48. It's probably 48 I probably started the assessment process at age 48, but I was 49 when I was diagnosed. It was a birthday present to myself.
Okay.
And I'd reached a point where, which is so familiar, I think, with so many people, I think especially women, being diagnosed with anxiety first, perimenopausal route and hormone replacement therapy, and both would work for a little bit, I think probably placebo, and then didn't. And I reached a point again where I think a lot of people do, where you just reach a point where you think, I could quite happily, not be in this life right now. Not that you would do anything about it, but there just was everything seemed hard, everything seemed difficult, everything seemed to go wrong all of the time. And I happened to be, so my profession is education, trained teacher, went down the specialist route. And what I realise now is that what I was trying to do was help all the children that were me. So I was very much motivated to help children with invisible additional needs. Funnily enough, that kind of focused on dyslexia, because there was dyslexia training out there. You could train to be a dyslexia assessor, which is what I did, with cognitive profiling. ADHD, I did work with children with ADHD, but it wasn't something I was particularly drawn to. And I started my first full-time job as a special needs coordinator in a school, and I knew that they had children with ADHD that they were struggling as a school to cope with, to meet their needs. So I knew I needed extra training, but booked myself on some training. It was supposed to be general ADHD training, and what I actually found was it was about girls and ADHD. And literally, it was Tony from the ADHD Foundation who gave the talk. And literally, from the first sentence, my mouth fell open and stayed open the entire rest of the day. And I was just in shock, because I was just like, since when are these things that you're talking about, these traits, these behaviours, these ways of seeing and being in the world, since when are they things? Because isn't everybody like that? And realised that obviously, no, everybody wasn't like that, because that's why there was training on it. And that I did fit the profile of ADHD. So that was when my story diagnosis started.
Okay.
And
so you that's interesting. That's very interesting. So if I hadn't been in the job I've been on, I don't know. That's interesting. Sorry, by the way, if there's a bit of a gap between us on the sound, the recording kind of zips together at some point. So I'm not deliberately talking over you, just so you know. By the way,
okay. Yeah. So I don't know if you want me to carry on, but
no, you carry on. Keep going. I'll come.
Yeah. Okay. I can talk for England, so just feel free to interrupt me. So in terms of if I go off track, which is quite possible. So where are we now? So I got my diagnosis, and then it was, I remember being at work and they're saying, well, what do you need? And I'm like, well, I don't know what I need, because as with everybody, you get your diagnosis and that's not, it's something, but it's not everything. It's not, you're kind of left with that label, and what do you do next? And parents find that with their children, and I guess that's where the coaching steps in. And what I found was, I think the medication, I think we're still recording, yeah. I think the medication gave me headspace to reassess my life. Yeah, real good. And I was working all the hours you could imagine. I was very intense. This is my special interest, really, ADHD, and the needs. It was the invisible needs of children in education. That was my neurodivergence, I guess. It was my special interest. So it was my passion. So it was what I lived and breathed. In the education system, you're constrained by the bureaucracy, which gets in the way of you doing the actual quality work. I implemented changes. I had an impact, but I couldn't carry on the way I was. It just became overwhelming. And when I'd worked all the way through the summer holidays, which is the big holiday over here in the UK, and my 11-year-old at the time said to me, achieving what I wanted to achieve, because that's the ADHD way, with all the perfectionism and high standards, and you could never do enough anyway in education, I realised that I needed to step outside the system to try and have an impact. So since then, I've had two journeys, really. One journey's been in terms of my business, and that's I just got a shop, which happened a space that happened to be 5 doors away from where I live, put some called it thinking space for children, put on the window, all the things I did, because I had multiple skills that I could use to help children, help parents, help schools as well, really. And yeah, people just came to me because the need is so great, the need is there. But my journey in my business evolved because that didn't really suit my brain. I realised as I got to know myself better in terms of ADHD, I realised that the processing was so draining for me in terms of doing dyslexia assessments, for example. I got brave and made the decision to stop doing those assessments, even though there was a massive demand for them. And even though I enjoyed the process, I recognised that the report writing side of things was not good for me, not good for my mental health, and was not using my best skills. So from there, that's where the coaching came in, because the coaching is something that use my strengths in terms of relating to people, in terms of connecting and recognising the hidden messages, the hidden thoughts and feelings, and picking up on that and reflecting it back, so I could be in the moment, and that really did match my strengths. So I've hyper-focused on that. So accredited ICF, which is the Gold Standard Coaching coach, using organic coaching, and gained additional specialist qualifications in ADHD. But the journey carried on. And I went on a personal journey, because when you're ADHD and you don't know you have a lifetime of feeling on the outside, of feeling like you're always trying to catch up or slow down one way or the other. You just never quite fit in. I've got a moment that I remember when I was doing psychotherapy training. I'm not a psychotherapist, but I did 2 years training, sort of foundational. Loveliest people ever that I trained with, absolutely lovely. And yet every time we had lunch, I dreaded it, because I always felt like I was on the outside, even though we were all connected, doing the same thing, and they were lovely people. I never thought I belonged. Yeah. So I have this big personal journey to go on, which I guess is never ending, but I've made massive strides in that. And the coaching process has helped with that, helped raise my awareness. But the thing that's really impacted me has been something called belief coding, which Jess Cunningham devised, and is a modality that combines various emotion coding,
frameworks,
coaching, almost like, lots of different frameworks all come together and allow you to connect to the subconscious, to identify trapped emotions and connect with the subconscious to see where they came from in your life and heal them. And that process has taken me on a journey of self-acceptance and self-belief. So I feel happier in myself now than I've ever felt. And
That's
I want that
wonderful.
for other people. And that's what,
Yeah.
when people come to me, that's what they say. They say, I know my strengths. I know I'm good at this. I know I'm good at that, but I don't feel it. And that's the key thing, is feeling it at the core. We can say about the superpowers, about ADHD or any neurodivergence. We can, but really feeling that, and being content with yourself, or more than content. I don't want to go cringy, and but loving who you are, accepting fully who you are. It just quietens that noise that comes from outside,
Does
that you've
it?
spent a
Can I
lifetime
just, can
battling
I
with.
just,
Sometimes
Marique,
self-imposed, I would say. People don't mean to
yeah.
relay the kind of judgments that you feel. But as somebody I
Mm.
did a post today about my last day of a well-known magazine that writes about ADHD, had as its post today about people with ADHD being hypersensitive. Why is it called hypersensitive? Why is it not seen? Why call it that? That's not a positive thing. That's like judgment. That's like a negative judgment about a skill that we have to pick up on nuanced emotional communication. And it's not always intended, and it might be a pain in the bum sometimes, that we are so attuned to other people's emotions. But it is a
Agreed.
strength. It is, if you're going to have a superpower, that is what I know. You can get out of control with rejection sensitivity dysphoria, but that again has calmed right down for me with this self-acceptance. Yeah, so
So do you,
that's my kind of journey.
no, that's really interesting, actually. What I may have to do is I may have to disconnect and reconnect. Give me a second, okay?
Okay.
Can you hear me? I believe that'll come back in a sec. Marie, can you hear me? Hey, sorry. I have never ever had an issue with this, and then all of a sudden, I have a bunch of kids playing Fortnite downstairs, and I actually have two internet circuits, and my computer for some reason had connected to the wrong one. I apologize. The great news is this software records independently, so we captured everything, which is wonderful. I could hear everything you were saying anyway. If I may, can I just go back and unpack a few things?
Yeah,
Because
of course, yeah.
as you were talking with your download, I kind of picked up on some things I wanted to just talk about, if that's okay.
Of course, yeah.
And a couple of questions. I'm particularly interested in your journey, your diagnosis, your use of medication, and then your skills that you used in your career, and then the talk you went to. Which is kind of fascinating, actually, because and then going into that, I feel different, and how you integrated the work you did into not feeling different, if I caught that correctly. But let me just go back. So you got your diagnosis a year later because of the system. You mentioned that, and then you talked about medication. Prior to that, before even knowing about ADHD, and you talked about HRT, and the ups and downs, and often what happens when people receive that moment in time of that diagnosis, they riffle through their entire life, and they go, oh yeah, those things really I related to. But some people medicate, some people don't. Did you self-medicate before, or did you have coping mechanisms as you go? And again, I don't want to bring things out, but I'm trying to get a message across to others in their own journey pre-diagnosis, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So I think in terms of self-medication, I guess the period of time that like comes to mind most strongly is university and college days and alcohol.
Yes, I relate to that, by the way.
So that was coping. Social situations were so stressful, and I just literally felt I had to be drunk to cope with them, really.
Yeah.
I don't know how aware I was of that. When I was a student, that was kind of the culture anyway. But yeah,
I know. No, it's great to talk to somebody about this as well, because I even today, post diagnosis, if I find myself out of an evening with people I'm unfamiliar with, I would actually find myself going towards the alcohol. I stop myself these days because I'm kind of able to, but the anxiety levels still do go up. They still exist,
Yeah.
for me. And historically, pre-diagnosis, they very much were the case, and often I was talking to somebody the other day who, a lady from an Asian background, actually, whose family didn't connect with alcohol, didn't approve of alcohol, didn't, all of those things that I would have associated with historically. And she threw herself into studying as her method of self-medication, which is rather interesting. Okay,
Yeah. So I could relate to that. So eternal students. So after my degree, I jumped straight into a PhD, which was ridiculous. That's very ADHD. It related, the passion and the conviction and the impulsivity. So that lasted about 8 months because I couldn't do it. I had to work at the same time, which meant I couldn't throw myself into the
I
academic
understand.
life. So knock that on the head. And since then, I took myself. I did a couple of MSc modules in London, self-funded. Realised I couldn't maintain that financially, so that stopped. Did postgraduate certification for teaching, and then the postgrad certification to be a dyslexia assessor, postgrad to be a Senko. Started a postgrad for general education related special needs and just found it boring, and that was actually at the time when I was looking at getting a diagnosis as well, and so that was wasted money and time. That stopped, and then a random master's in poetry writing just came from nowhere. I just decided I wanted to write poetry and got a merit in writing poetry.
Love it.
Like lived and breathed it for 2 years, loved it, not done it. I had a poem published, so that was that box ticked, and that's it.
And move on, right?
Never read and not written another poem.
I
2
love
years I
it.
was doing it non-stop.
I love that so much. That's amazing. That's so typical ADHD, isn't it? It's just massive hyper focus. Do it. Yeah, done that. Next, move on. Next.
Yeah, that's been on my life in everything.
Me too. And then the medication. I have recently, I took Ritalin LA actually for about 12 years, and have recently changed to from methylphenidate to amphetamine, to a product over here. I live in Ireland, despite the accent, and the product is called Tyvens over here. I think it's got a slightly different brand name over there in the UK anyway. And I found that to be extremely interesting for the calming effect. And the way I describe it is, when I don't take medication, I am aware that my sphere of awareness is probably about 30 feet around me, the size of a classroom, And if people are around me, I'm more interested in everybody else's stuff that's going on instead of what I'm doing. Whereas when I take the Tyvens, my sphere of awareness comes down to a bubble that's just around me. And I find that incredible. What is your experience with medication yourself, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think, actually, you say that. So when did I come off it? I came off it, so I was on it about 18 months, so it's probably about 18 months since I came off it.
Yeah.
So it was private, so I had my doses of Elvance increased to a point where I remember the first time I took medication, I don't know if it's placebo effect, but I've heard other people say something similar. I literally felt like somebody had wiped the lenses of my eyes, and the clarity I felt, it was crazy. Unfortunately, that didn't last, so I don't know what that was, if that was if it was just placebo or what, I don't know. But yes, I gradually had the medication increased. I felt like it did give me that headspace to reevaluate my life and get that bit of distance and see the bigger picture. It did help me do that. But then I made the decision. What I didn't like was in the mornings, I felt like a stone. I literally, so I tried to take the medication a lot earlier, almost like 4 o'clock in the morning, to try and counteract that. And what I found as well was when it wore off, that my symptoms were worse than they ever. So I had hyper focus going on all through the night, so that I didn't go to bed till 5 o'clock one time. That was work related. So I took the decision, because I was in a situation where I felt I could, that I would make my life fit around my ADHD rather than my ADHD, sort of mold my ADHD to fit in a life that was determined by other people, which I think is what I would have to do if I was working in the school. But because I could have my own life as it suited me, have the variety, have the movement. The theory was exercise, but it's limited to dog walk. I haven't really managed to integrate that fully. Eat more healthily, again, that's an ongoing challenge, but I do try. But just, I think the main thing is the emotional regulation for me. That rejection sensitivity dysphoria was massive for me, and partly because I've developed myself, sense of self-worth, self-awareness, and partly because the lifestyle that I live now, that's reduced a lot. So I'm happy with the way things are. I do sometimes wonder whether I should go back on medication, because I still have the ADHD symptoms of scattiness, and I get frustrated with myself that I'm not as productive as I want to be, but I don't know if that's just that negative voice that we have where we can never do enough.
Do you think it's a very interesting transition to go from a very socially orientated job role in a school, which is, I personally, and again, everybody's different, but I personally, with my own ADHD, would find that incredibly overwhelming, and my emotional control would be out of control in that type of environment. And yet, by moving myself environmentally I've worked remotely for 20 years, right? And traveled where necessary, and had limited periods of time with groups of people in my own profession in order to manage the environment that suits my ADHD. But that was by luck rather than judgment that I created that environment. Like if you talk to somebody who's, say, for example, dyslexic, they can go years, and I know you know a lot more about this subject than I do, but they can go years by developing these tactics and skills around, avoiding facing it, and so successfully. And it sounds to me as if you change your environment successfully to be able to do that, with the coaching, or transitioning from the shop, if you like, to the coaching.
Yeah.
Do the symptoms of ADHD ever go away? A previous person who I think very highly of, Bridget Kalari, who lives actually not a huge distance from you, just south of Manchester. And she said to me in a private text, and she's given me permission to say this. So, and she said, "George, I'm 29. Does this ever go away?" And I said, "No, it doesn't." But
No.
I think you develop the tools and techniques to do so, and that's a good thing. I spend my life on the sofa sometimes, and I'm not ashamed of it anymore. I'm open to others about who I am. I have ADHD. It's. I'm just interested in your view of that as well. The environmental change to support it.
Yeah, I think the main thing is being around people who are accepting of your ADHD. So everyone I work with's got ADHD. So it's, It's a win-win situation. Like, I had a client last week and she said, oh my God, it's like looking in the mirror, which I took as a compliment because she must have been at least 20 years younger than me. So I was quite happy with that.
Oh,
But
that's very nice.
yeah, that's another theory I have, that people with ADHD are a lot younger than they are, I reckon. So I don't know if that's to do with the neurodevelopmental stuff. Anyway, that's bye. What was the original question about?
The
Sorry, I've
environmental change. No,
yeah,
no, you're absolutely fine.
yeah, so partly it's to do with the people that I'm surrounded by. So it's like user-friendly people, people that I know are understanding and accepting, and the belief coding community as well, a lot of holistic energy healers, and people that are very open and warm and kind and caring people, and accepting. Obviously the clients at ADHD, so that's all good. Yeah, that's I kind of make my world safe, emotionally safer, I think, is the thing. I've understood what's not safe and what impacts me, and I don't think it's that I'm more resilient or more able to cope with those situations. I think I would perhaps be a little, able to advocate for myself more, but then my processing is very slow. So I'm not very good in the moment, but I would probably still be able to put strategies in place to accommodate that, by letting people know that I might come back to you in half an hour with an opinion or an objection or whatever. So I guess, but it's not something I relish or a situation I want to be in. I used to find talking to people, as in presenting a challenge, and I'm less, because I'm more accepting of myself now and not trying to present as somebody that I'm not. I guess it's a subject that I'm talking about. So I'm usually talking about me, talking about ADHD, and I use my own experiences too, and the experiences of clients and children, to sort of supplement that, because I'm talking about things I feel comfortable with, and I know what works for me and what doesn't, and I just go with the stuff that works for me, really.
That's interesting.
That's what
Can
I
I
do.
ask? Can I ask about your work with children? You're the first person actually on the podcast who has worked with children as a coach, as as an educator, if you like. And I'm kind of fascinated by that, because when I grew up, I'm the typical naughty boy. Didn't struggle at school, got all of my exams and so on and so forth, but was kind of disruptive in class, if I'm frank, And I know, I've interviewed a lot of women on the podcast as well, and I've learned a lot about the differences between how ADHD manifests itself internalizes itself in women, and in men it kind of externalizes itself. And it's a great to see and understand that a little bit more. But in kids, how does it, how do you work with children is it the same as adults, or do you have a different set of techniques, or, is it just listening,
Yeah, it's different. So using organic coaching, that's applicable really for teens age 14 above. I have tried it with younger children, and it's not quite, they need more direction, really. But what I've found is that I've had really quick results with boys in particular. I think all my teens have been boys, actually, which I guess isn't surprising. But yeah, having that piece about hearing from somebody else who's not a parent, and I feel sorry for parents as well, because I feel, I know as a parent, I've got 3 children, everybody, all parents are under pressure to be, for their kids to be, a certain way, to be positive, thriving in the way that's judged by the people, for you to be seen as a parent who's parents in the right way. So there's all these external pressures anyway. When you've got a child with ADHD, I think it's very hard not to not be affected by that judgment of other people. Judgment about your child, that's hurtful, and then judgment about you as a parent, that's hurtful, and that's another layer of stress that parents have to deal with. But anyway, I've gone off on a tangent there. But in terms of the boys that I've worked with, because originally I was offering like 6-week packages and 12-week packages, and actually having that original, so in the intake session that I do with anybody, we look at a whole life and they do a self-evaluation of their whole life and a bit of a deep dive on particular areas that come up to that for them as a discomfort, really. And when we've gone through that, and quite often there's lots of opportunities to flip the narrative there. So, I had one boy who rated his self-esteem as low, and I asked him what that was about. So he said, "Oh, well, I do lots of hobbies, but I never stick at anything. I'm not really good at anything." But you do all those different things. That's amazing. You just think of the breadth of experiences and skills that you've got, and you can just see the light bulb moments. And it's just little things like that to have the narrative flipped. And, they're struggling with studies. I mean, that there's lots of different ways that you can approach that. It's not just that one that you've been told. There's these different ways, and you can try different ones. And if you eat this food before you study, or you do some exercise before you study, or you listen to some music at the same time, or you let yourself, fidget or whatever, your brain will work more efficiently. And, when they get these little nuggets of information, you can just see it just flips a switch, and that's kind of all that's needed. And so I find, like, 3 or 4 sessions, they're good to go. They don't need me, not to say they won't ever need coaching again, or they don't need coaching, but I think for teens who don't want to be different, they don't want to be seen different as their peers, they do want to get on, and they do want to be able to cope, and they do want to feel positive about themselves. You could do that in 3 or 4 sessions, it seems. I wasn't expecting, but that's what I found.
That's interesting.
That's enough. Yeah. That's all they've needed.
Yeah. That's fascinating, actually. And I suspect that is, I do wonder whether or not societally, and I've had this conversation with others as well, that the typical scenario that is, people paint a picture to me of the classroom, the child expected to sit down in their seat and listen to the teacher, and the boy who's fidgeting, or the girl who is, I'm hypothesizing, who's like staring out of the window daydreaming, and not wanting to be there. And I often think, my own son, actually, who's in class, who happens to attend a school, he doesn't have an ADHD diagnosis, and probably the reason why he doesn't is because the school he attends has an incredible number of movement breaks, an incredible number, over and above. And I'm not suggesting that particular school is any better than any other. I think they're just more set up to short windows of learning, which is very quick, and then lots and lots of movement breaks throughout the day. And I kind of like that. And I suppose my thinking process is this, that if the environment can change naturally to support all of the different types of beings that exist in a room, because not everybody will sit quietly and study, and I don't just mean ADHD folks, I'm talking about, the spectrum of everybody. If the schools or the offices, the corporate world can just adjust slightly, then I don't know if ADHD in particular would actually be seen as a problem anymore. And I'd love to kind of promote that type of thinking. We've talked about your situation, my situation, where we've changed our environment over time. Yours is by judgment, mine's purely by luck. And as a result of that, we're both happier in the environment we are. And I have a coach, an ADHD coach myself. What do you think about that? Just that general slight change to a school system or to an office-based setup that may support this type of thing. Do you think that's feasible, or?
I think it's feasible, and I think it's valuable, but it's just one layer. So that's like addressing some of the, I don't know, physical symptoms, maybe. So the sort of technical side of ADHD, the emotional side of ADHD is still like a massive thing, I think, in terms of self-esteem and self-worth. And I think another to go hand in hand with that in education in particular, and I guess in the workplace, is that opportunity for kids to shine, for adults to play to their strengths. And to have that opportunity in education, it's tricky because it's the idea about what's successful and what should be achieved and what's the indicator of success is very prescriptive. And so there's limited opportunities there. So all the amazing people that have done all these amazing things in the world, the inventors and the entrepreneurs, and did they ever have chance to showcase those skills in a school setting? I doubt it. And all those kids that are in schools now with the same skill set and the same potential, are they getting the opportunity to shine? I doubt it, because there's just that pressure to conform and be a certain way. So yes, to make changes that help kids get to cope, but it's just coping. That's just coping with the environment. And yes, to help them do that, but there's still another level where they need to be shown or have the opportunity to explore and find out about their amazingness as well and their uniqueness, and so that they can value themselves and their worth, because neurodivergent people do feel different to other people. I don't think there's any way of getting away from that. You can make it all sort of flow more easily and look less messy and conform, but internally you still got that sense. I know it's weird, isn't it, that feeling on the outside. And I guess I still in situations I would still feel on the outside. Is there any way of getting over that? Or is it just a case of needing to replace it with feeling positive, positive, and understanding yourself in a positive way?
It's really interesting. So, we talked about the environmental. You've just talked about what I call the psychosocial element, that additional layer on top of, how you integrate as a person with a group and your feelings about yourself. And isn't it amazing, though, how a lot of the stories that, books are written about, and particularly children's books as well, where, the protagonist feels different. They grew up differently. I can think of so many books. I mean, Percy Jackson's one, Harry Potter's another one, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I used to love Naughty Girl. Enid Blyton's The Naughty Girl in the school book.
Yes, absolutely.
And now it's like so obvious why. And yet,
absolutely.
I've only just realised, because I identified, I wasn't. I mean, she was misunderstood. I was, because I was. I don't know if I can just interject, but when you said about women and girls in the classroom, and I kind of fit that profile of the. I had the teacher that said, "Oh, she's always looking out the window, but she gets good grades, so it must be okay." I had the teacher that who actually couldn't see and was blind, non-sighted, and had a guide dog, and she always picked me up on talking. And no other teacher ever picked me up on talking, because I was a good girl. I was one of the high achievers and a good girl at school, so I never got into trouble. She always picked me up because she could obviously, her hearing was so acute.
Her hearing was so, of course.
And I was like so indignant, like, it's not me, she's got the wrong person. But I think now I probably was not aware that I was talking. And I did things like, so lessons that I found boring, I would not get my book out of my bag. I would pretend I'd forgotten it and do the work on paper, so that I didn't have to concentrate in the lesson, so I could just daydream. And then I would happily catch up with the work at home, because I was conscientious, whilst listening to music and work hard. So I was kind of an invisible rebel. So I was still a rebel, but you wouldn't. I even got credit for doing that. I remember my teacher holding my book up because I'd done this work at home and saying, how conscientious I was. So, and I had music lessons, and they were in a different building. So on a Friday, when my music lessons were timetabled, in those days there was no email, so teachers had no idea when my lessons were. So I would go out like every hour and go for a nice little walk for 15 minutes, pretending I had a lesson, and then come back again. But I never got picked up for it because I was a good girl. And I think that's the hard thing about boys, and with the ADHD label, it kind of goes against them. I think it's almost like waiting for them to live up to the expectation of the label. And it's like the label doesn't come with anything. I know when I was working at school, when I'd gone on this training to find out ADHD, and a teenager who got diagnosed with ADHD, nothing comes with that, and you don't get any support as a school as to what to do and how to help them.
Mm.
And this is somebody who had ADHD, but I didn't know at the time.
Right.
Or I didn't, or I had diagnosed at the time. But yeah, the message I want to get across to schools is that you don't have to be an ADHD expert. You just have to accept that any neurodivergent child can experience the world in a different way to you. And it might not make any sense to you, and you might not be able to relate to it. But just accept that, just respect it, and make the environments emotionally safe so that they, A, feel accepted, and B, are able to communicate what their needs are, because children usually do know what it is, at least what they find difficult, if not the solution, and what they need. And I think that would regulate emotional responses, which are part of the problem in the classroom environment.
I think you're right, actually. I very much think you're right. And I think, irrespective of where in the world, and we'll come on in a second actually to societal, your societal viewpoint there in the UK, but it's now so amazingly prevalent that in every classroom, in most countries, and if not every country, there will be at least one or two neurodivergent children in that class. That, I'm statistically guessing that, by the way, when I make that statement, but it's got to be true. It's got to be, hasn't it?
It's more than that. I reckon 4 or 5.
Yeah, very much. And as a result of that, just a little bit of knowledge into the educational staff to be able to, and I know it's a tough job. I get that completely. And there's no criticism at all for the amazing work that educators do on the whole, but a little bit of extra knowledge to embrace neurodiversity would go a heck of a long way, I think.
But I think as teachers as well, you're experts in the subject you're teaching. Then you've got the pedagogy around, behaviours and learning as well. And I don't think it's realistic to expect teachers to have an in-depth understanding of a whole range of neurodivergent and other conditions. All that's needed is for them to feel, the teachers to feel, that they've got permission to be flexible. And I think that's part of the problem, with the inspections and the prescriptive way that education is. There's not that flexibility built in. So teachers are probably having to work against their instincts a lot of the time, or just under the stress. And what you want is for the children's emotional well-being to be considered. But, it's that old scenario that you can't fill for an empty cup. That applies for parents, and it applies for teachers who are stressed, under pressure, feeling like they've been moulded to deliver a set curriculum in a set way. It doesn't, the whole thing, it just doesn't allow for flexibility, and it's flexibility that's needed. Flexibility and respect for everybody the whole way through. The kids, the parents, the teachers. That's what's needed, instead of like a sausage factory kind of approach.
I think you're right, and that's probably why many ADHD people become entrepreneurs, right? And the Elon Musks of this world, and I know he's the big name in the world at the moment, with his Asperger's and so on and so forth. But they think differently and like to work in an entrepreneurial fashion. Certainly here in Dublin, in Ireland, it's not necessarily down to the innate Irish culture, but it's to do with the fact that Dublin has become a tech hub of the world for tax reasons, to the world. That the inbound population has promoted such a startup community within the city and actually over the country there seems to be a very high proportion of entrepreneurs that are born out of here. And I know certainly there's parts of the UK that have that kind of, entrepreneurial relationship. I know Glasgow doesn't, and certainly London, if not Manchester as well, which is great to see. People developing post-education, their natural ability to utilize their ability to think differently to better the world, which is a wonderful thing. So that's nice to see. Let me ask you a question around the UK and how far the UK has come societally in terms of, and let's generalize around neurodivergence. And I often, there's a particular photograph that you can Google, and this is not just you, but anybody who's watching, and it's the 1980s. So, I'm 54, and the 1980s is when I went to school, and there is a black and white photograph of children with autism who are handcuffed to a steel radiator. And in my lifetime, I'll never forget that image. It's very potent in my thinking process of thinking how far the UK has come societally in terms of its acceptance of neurodivergence. And I know it's got a long way to go. And it's been 20 odd years since I've lived there. Marie, how do you feel society in the UK has come since we went to school, right? I mean, we're not that different in age, right? So it's what's your thinking there?
So I think in terms of parents, the awareness is there, but it's my language is failing me. The structures, no, that's not the word. The institutions. In the institutions haven't stayed. I don't think the institutions have kept pace. So I think amongst people generally, I think there's a lot more awareness and acceptance, and parents who are prepared to, so often these parents have such, they don't give up. And I just think, gosh, where do you get your strength from? And but they're still fighting. They have to fight the system. And I guess that's down to resources. I don't know. So I saw today on LinkedIn, I can't remember which organisation it was, but the government was giving £3 million to mental health hubs in communities, which is great, but there's still people struggling to get assessments and having to wait for ages for assessments, or who are not getting education healthcare plans, or and there's barriers. There's so many barriers. So if it's not democratized, that's not. I don't know the right form of the
No,
word.
I think you're right.
In terms of so, for example, applying for education healthcare plans, which is for the children that get extra allocated funding to meet their needs in schools. So we know it's hard to get, but there's like little secret rules, like, in theory, if a child's got needs and the parent recognises those needs, they should be able to flag it up, and the system should listen to that and assess it. And probably officially that is the case. But unofficially, if the request comes from a parent rather than the school, they're unlikely to progress. And yet you may well have a school that, you pot luck as to whether you've got a school that actually understands that child's needs, because you've got the whole thing around masking. Masking is still not understood. So that whole idea that a child can cope with school and then they can go home and have a complete and utter meltdown, and is not because of parenting. It's because their whole sense of being has been stretched to the limit to cope with that environment, and they've just got to let go somewhere. And the safe place is at home, and that's where it happens. And so that's the indicator to the parents, something's amiss. And obviously they know their child better than anybody else. There's a tendency, I don't know why, for educators often to feel like they understand children that they teach in class of 30 better than the parents. There's still a lot of judgment around parents. I don't know if that's just again down to the stresses that teachers are under. I don't know. So I think there's definitely, understanding around neurodivergence has come leaps and bounds, but it's in pockets. It's not all the way through the system.
That's interesting. But are you in agreement that certainly, in the last 30, 40 years, the system has come a long way? I think it's still got a long way to go, but it has come a long way.
Yeah. So
Or am I completely mistaken?
No,
Yeah.
like, oh gosh, no, completely. So there was no chance of me ever getting an ADHD diagnosis until now, really, I would say.
I agree.
Whereas,
same here.
Somebody in their 30s, me in my 30s now probably could, and me as a child, maybe. I mean, there were red flags, but it would have taken somebody who really knew their stuff, I think, to have recognised ADHD in me. I think the mental health side of things is a massive red flag that, I mean, children self-harming now, maybe the red flags are bigger. I cried a lot in my bed at night, so that was my way of coping, and that's the thing that might have been picked up on. Running into a wall when I was 13, that's my other little story that I tell. As a child, I always, because I was overthinking the situation, always falling off my bike, walking into things, I was constantly covered in bruises, messy handwriting, forgetting, losing everything. But they're all things that you think, oh, that's okay, it's not a big deal. But when it's a whole package and it's just that internalized experience, really, it's what's going on inside that needs digging. And I guess there's still not much scope for that to happen. If a girl's doing okay at school, she's getting results in some subjects, she's, there's no massive red flags. She's not going to get picked up.
Yeah,
and
I
likewise, for the noisy boy who maybe has a challenging background, he's not going to get picked up as well. He's just going to be labelled as a
absolutely. I interviewed a wonderful gentleman, Liam Chewy from London.
I know Liam.
Isn't he an incredible human being?
Yeah, he's
what a story.
He's so good with children. Actually, he is
amazing.
Really good. He's works with children who with autism who wouldn't come out of their bedroom, and he's got them up and doing activities with their siblings.
He's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Tell me, do you when we talk about, I interviewed a lady by the name of Annie Romanos in New Zealand a few weeks ago, and she said to me, we were talking about societal impact on, I live in a small nation, 5 billion people here in Ireland, and, not dissimilar in New Zealand. And she said, we were talking about investment into the school system and public health care there as well. And she said, when they had the very young Prime Minister, Jacinta Ardern, I think she was 28 or something when she was elected, she said the amount of money that was injected in, she said she saw a massive rise in the system's ability to do the assessments, to support in the schools, and a big thing. And when Jacinta kind of left, that money kind of went down again, as did the level of service, which is kind of a bit of a shame, really, because when you look at the United Kingdom, England, if you like, in and of itself. There are constant challenges for 50 or 60 years with the NHS. And yet, post-COVID, we're finding that, something I learned today, and I've obviously lived outside of the country for so long, but this thing called the right to choose. Are you aware of this? Do you know about this?
Yeah, but there's been, hasn't there? I mean, my knowledge isn't reliable, but I know about the right to choose. I don't know how easy it is to activate, and I think it's become less easy. I know that there's clinics that were on the right to choose sort of pathway that are now not doing that. So I don't know.
Okay, so
I don't know. I don't know if it's a postcode lottery or I don't know.
Is that right? Okay, that's interesting.
I
The
don't
reason
know.
I
I
asked the
don't know. I
question,
don't know.
okay, no, the reason I asked the question very specifically, and again, it's about the UK for anybody who's listening, is that there is a law that was passed where somebody who goes to their GP, where a GP will forward a referral on to a particular provider for something, and in this case, we're talking about an ADHD diagnosis as an example. That person can do there and actually say to their GP, no, I would like to be seen by this company or this individual for that diagnosis. And the theory behind it, and Marie, keep me straight here, but the theory behind it is that ultimately, that should reduce the waiting time in order to see somebody. But what you're actually saying, and I deliberately asked the question because the person I was talking to was based in London, where there's a lot more people. There's probably a lot more companies that provide that service than there is in the north of England. And in your opinion, and again, it's just me kind of finding out, is that isn't so much the case in your part of the world.
I just think I get the impression, and it's just anecdotal, that it's less. There's more barriers to accessing that now than there was, but I could be totally wrong. It might have just been a moment. But I just know that there was one company that was very big in terms of being that alternative provider that stopped doing it. So whether they got replaced by other alternatives or not, I don't know. But there are some, I have seen, there are some private companies that really do try to offer affordable assessment options to parents, and sometimes it's like for a certain period of time, or sometimes it's ongoing. Some of them as well that'll do the dual assessments, which I think is so important for autism and ADHD.
Agreed.
Because often, parents go through all that, and the children with the diagnosis, and then they've got another hoop to
jump through.
Nice if it was just one-stop shop for all.
Absolutely, and just then you can then begin your journey, and because diagnosis is a beginning, I think.
Yeah.
Towards that, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. Listen, I've got a couple more questions for you, if I may. One is a very brief one, and it's supply of ADHD meds in your part of the world. I've heard. Here in Ireland, certainly in other parts of the world, I've heard there is a supply chain problem with certain ADHD meds. Is that something that you and or your patients, and I know you don't take it anymore, but your clients, I should say, or something you're aware of in your part of the world, that there is an issue?
I'm only aware of it from social media. My clients have been fine, but I have seen it on social media that it's an issue.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And then as I wrap this up, and it's been a delight talking to you so much. I kind of, there's probably about 50 other subjects I'd like to talk to you about. But I always ask this final question because I think it's very poignant for anybody who's listening, who's either just been diagnosed or is seeking a diagnosis and going through that kind of painful period of time of am I not, and so on and so forth. But reflecting upon your life to date, the highs, the lows of ADHD that it's brought, and the wonderful work that you're doing, if I could click my fingers and take that neurodiversity out of your brain and go, Marie, would you take it away?
Never. No. It's who you are now, and like, no offense to neurotypical people, but who wants to be neurotypical? I don't know. Who wants to be boring?
Exactly. No,
it's just
absolutely.
giving yourself the permission to not be boring and to be you, and to realize that is absolutely fine, and that is who you're meant to be. I don't know why we can't give people that permission to be who they are, regardless of the diagnosis. Actually, shouldn't we just all feel that, regardless of any labels?
I want to believe that as well. Like you, I'm happiest talking to my own tribe of others with ADHD as well. and I really enjoy it. That's why I do the podcast, just to get the message out there. But actually, I have to say, I feel it's like therapy. Every time I talk to somebody with ADHD, I get
Yeah,
a huge amount out of it, because it's always
yeah.
different. It's always unique. It's wonderful. So
And it's just that validation. So even, for me, every single one of my clients that I work with, it's a gift. It's a gift to me as well to work with them.
absolutely.
It is a joy and a gift. Yeah.
Absolutely. Marie Helen Herbert, thank you. You've been a delight. I'm going to press pause now. Just hold on a
Okay.
sec. Thank you
Okay.
so much.